Hey everyone, so today I wanted to make a bit of a strange video, maybe, but I wanted to talk about the fact that I have struggled with an eating disorder and I'm still kind of getting over it right now. Maybe this is a bit of a strange video to make, but I wanted to make it first of all for myself because this has been the first thing in my life that has affected me in such a way that I feel super uncomfortable talking about it, and it's just sort of hung over me and been extremely difficult for me to mention to people. I've kept it hidden. I mean, I hope I have. And I also wanted to make this video because I feel that society has a distorted idea of what an eating disorder really is. I think we tend to associate it with the really extreme cases of it, which obviously I'm not denying that some horrible things happen to people, but I feel like it tends to be shoved away in a box with like other mental illness and not discussed in the way that it should be and not known about in the way that it should be known about. So yeah, I guess I'll start out by talking about my personal story and my experience. So basically about 2.5 years ago, I made the conscious choice to start eating healthier. No, let me rephrase that. About 2.5 years ago, I made the conscious choice to start living a healthier lifestyle. So, mainly that was because I was realizing that I wasn't really getting a lot of physical activity because I've never been really into sports, and I was just loafing a lot. So, I started to jog. I have a treadmill in my basement, so that was basically what happened. It wasn't something that I got extremely into at first. I did it like once a week, yeah. And I made some minor changes to my diet as well, just being slightly more conscious of what I was eating in terms of how healthy it was. And these two things progressed a bit, and there was a certain point where I was genuinely living pretty healthy in terms of my diet and lifestyle. About a year ago, these two things started to progress a little too much, especially the exercise. A year ago, I was in a not very good place in my life mentally. I had a lot of anxiety, especially social anxiety. I dealt with a bit of depression as well and just being generally down for a good period of time. And my way of trying to cope with that and to compensate for my unhappiness was to try and make myself happier. And my theory was that if I was living healthier, I would be happier. Because that is, I guess, the healthy people slogan, if that makes sense. And so I started to exercise a lot. I started to become pretty obsessive with my workout regime. It went from every 3 days for running every 3 days up until every other day, and then at some point it got to 2 days of running, 1 day rest. And in there I would also throw in different workout videos and different muscular training as well. Even though my workouts never got to a point where they were actually intense for I guess the average person standard, it was something that my body was not used to, and I was also pushing myself to a point where I couldn't really push myself that hard, especially in terms of what I was eating. So my obsession with working out progressed so much that it got to a point where I would miss social things because that day I had to run. I would leave places early, or I would just not go and hang out with my friends because I knew I wouldn't be home on time to do my workout. I recall certain times where for whatever reason I got suddenly busy with something and missed my workout that day, and I would literally come home in tears because I felt like that was the end of the world, that I couldn't possibly be healthy if I wasn't maintaining my strict regime. Eventually, also about a year ago, a little over a year ago, this obsession with working out translated into food. I developed this mentality that because I was working out so much and maintaining a nice figure, I suppose, that I wasn't supposed to intake the 2,000 calories that you're supposed to actually intake, but that I needed to cut that in half. and then I would get about 1,000 calories a day, as well as cut in half my carbs and my fats, because that is what healthy people do. So I would religiously look on the back of packages and to make sure that I wasn't intaking too much in a day, and do the calculations every time I would eat something. And I also had this obsession with everything that I intake to be healthy. So I would read the ingredients of stuff to make sure that everything was natural and organic and all of these things, which I guess at the root is good, but the obsession that I developed with it made me eat less and less. And anytime I would treat myself to anything that wasn't 100% to my health standards, I would feel extremely, extremely guilty. And I remember a specific time where I was actually on vacation in the summer, and I had a much larger piece of cake than I had anticipated eating of that cake, and I literally went crazy. I cried and threw a fit, because I'm like, oh my god, how could I possibly have done that to my body? I'm disrespecting my body. I'm gonna ruin my figure. I'm gonna ruin my health. And obviously saying that out loud sounds extremely ridiculous for anyone that hasn't gone through it, but it really got to a point where my obsession was that bad. Yeah, and it also got to a point where, because I was depriving myself so much of treats, anytime I would be presented with any type of treat, I would tend to binge on it. Not to the point that people would normally associate with eating disorders, I guess, but I would just eat so much of it and I couldn't control myself, because it was like I was making up for all of the times that I had been without sweets, which maybe sounds a bit strange, but obviously the fact that I would intake more than I would even normally intake made the guilt overpower me, and it just got to a point where I was so obsessed, and it was really bad. But I was generally good at hiding my crazy obsession and masking it with the fact that I thought that it was an insanely healthy thing to do. I genuinely thought that this was me being extremely healthy, but what really ticked off that there was a problem was changes physically. So I went to see my pediatrician for my yearly checkup towards the end of August, and she was concerned with the fact that, number one, I hadn't had a period in 2 months. I had lost 10 pounds and therefore was classified as being underweight at this point, because I've always been relatively slim and I was originally kind of at the borderline. As well as the fact that my blood pressure was pretty difficult to hear and my heart rate was way lower than it had been the previous year. So she basically just instructed me to eat more and gain 2 pounds and come back. I really tried to listen, because I was genuinely concerned about the changes in my body that I really had not anticipated. But what ended up happening is that the more I was conscious of trying to eat more, the more I ended up eating less. And I did gain the 2 pounds when I was supposed to go see her, but it kind of fluctuated up and down because my obsession was actually progressing and getting worse and worse. By the beginning of October, this was really starting to concern my parents, so they brought me to the adolescent clinic, which is a branch of the Children's Hospital. I don't even want to go into detail about my first experience there, because it was genuinely the worst day of my life, but basically the way that it works is that each patient is assigned to a specific doctor. But before I even meet the doctor, the first session is kind of an hour's worth of interrogation and asking questions so that they could figure out what's wrong with you, what they could diagnose you with, how they could help, and so on and so forth. So that part was pretty fine. And then I met my actual doctor, and she was also quite fine. But the doctor that I was assigned to is actually a fellow, which means that she's not yet specified in adolescent medicine, and therefore she needs to consult with another doctor who's already specialized in it, and so he had to be there as well in my first session. This man really ruined my day and ruined my life in a way, as horrible as that sounds. Basically, I was in a room with 3 people that I'd never met before, one of which was a really not empathetic man who just seemed really pissed off and didn't even want to be there. And he just bluntly looked at me and said, "You have an eating disorder." At which point I burst into tears because I was extremely confused. I figured that he was definitely wrong, that he was definitely somehow out to get me and didn't know what he was talking about. And so then he told me that I had to stop doing all workouts for the next 2 weeks just until I could go back to my next appointment so that they could evaluate me further. And obviously I didn't take that advice because I was not about to listen to this man. I requested to never see him again, and so far I have not. I've met with other doctors every week that consulted with the fellow who is my doctor. But anyways, after the 2 weeks passed and I went back, I was referred to a nutritionist. And the nutritionist is really the person who made me see that I did have a problem and that I needed to fix it. And originally, my first appointment with her was also extremely overwhelming, confusing, but she basically went over a list of the things that I would eat in a normal day and told me what I needed to add in and what I needed to eat from now on and gave me specific products to buy. And at first, because I was so concerned and so confused, I just took this as homework and followed her guidelines, just blindly trying not to think about it, pushing out of my head everything that I was eating and just eating what she was telling me, even though it was something that usually I would never eat and definitely not in the quantity that she was saying that I needed to. After a while of doing it blindly, I was not malnourished anymore and I could actually think straight, I guess, and eventually it did improve. And now, obviously, I still do have some bad thoughts, but through discussion and through her explanation and making changes to my diet, I've managed to get over most of my habits and definitely my obsession. And yeah, that's where I stand now in terms of that. Now, on a physical level, I did mention the fact that my heart rate was low and that I wasn't getting periods. I actually didn't get my period back until the end of November. It had been a good 4 or 5 months since I had had it, which was pretty traumatizing if you have it regularly. But what really, really traumatized me and really confused me and made me feel pretty bad about myself was the fact that I was losing hair in clumps. And maybe to some people that doesn't sound so crazy, but I literally got to a point where I was scared to take a shower. I was scared to brush my hair because when I would run my fingers through my hair like this, I would pull out a clump of hair in my hand. And I was losing so much hair that I started to get traumatized that I was gonna go bald or I don't even know what, because I've always had thick hair and so much of it, and to feel it thinning out and to lose it in my hands was a really scary experience, and I'm so happy that that problem has resolved itself now. Also, on a more psychological level, as I said before, the way that I was coping with the anxiety that I dealt with last year was by trying to compensate for it. And obviously, I didn't realize at the time that this healthy thing was my way of trying to cope, but it really was. And actually, it turned out to be pretty bad because it actually increased my anxiety without me realizing. I had convinced myself so much that I was happy, that I thought I was happy, but really I was so rigid and focused and obsessive and strict on myself that I was actually becoming more and more anxious, and especially socially anxious, because I was missing out on a lot of social things and just making myself almost an outcast by having different eating habits and workout habits than everyone else. And it was a strange thing, but now looking back on it and being able to not have this rigidity anymore, I realize that now I'm genuinely a lot happier, and I don't need to convince myself that I'm happy. I just know that I am and that I feel better about myself. And honestly, what really brought me to make this video right now and was that the last time I was at the adolescent clinic, I used the washroom there for the first time, and what I saw in that washroom was so disturbing. The stall that I went into, and I assume a lot the other stall was this way as well, but was so full of writing all over the walls from different girls that are dealing with eating disorders. And when I say full, it was way worse than a school bathroom stall. It was all over the side wall, some on the back, some on the actual door. It was just really intense, and the writing was so overwhelming and so negative, and the majority of these comments were from girls that were suffering with eating disorders, and eating disorders that had gotten to them worse than they had gotten to me. People that were saying, remember those times before they forced food down your throat, or I don't have an illness, I am an illness. And one of them also that really affected me was really almost written as a poem, but I just remember the one line where it said, they say I need to get rid of Anna, but she's the only thing I have. I assume Anna is anorexia. And just thinking of the people that were probably in there writing these things and the things that they dealt with really brought me to tears. And it made me realize how lucky I was that I got help before it got to that type of point. And looking back on it now, I realize that my obsession was progressing at an exponentially fast rate, that I would have gotten to a really, really intense state had no one helped me out before this. And that is why I think it's so important to make an eating disorder something that is not taboo, something that is not put away in a box, and something that people realize is all around us, and that just because you don't pick it out super easily, and just because people are able to create this illusion that what they're doing is fine and that they're really alright, doesn't mean that they're actually alright. And I just needed to bring attention to that because it really, really affected me and really, I don't know, made me feel like I had to do something when I saw that writing on the wall. The last thing I wanted to say was about this kind of weird body image social stigma. For me personally, my eating disorder did not stem from a body image problem, as I mentioned when I said what it did stem from. But I realized that for a lot of people it does. And obviously at one point when I realized that my body was changing, I was pretty happy with the changes, and you know, it got to a point where I really wanted to conserve them. But what I noticed recently is that maybe in our society we've gotten past the point of needing people to be extremely skinny, and I think we're definitely more acceptant of different body types and realizing the negative effects that, you know, shaming people for their body can have. But I feel like recently we've taken a weird turn where instead of just making everyone of any body type feel comfortable with themselves, they're almost blaming anyone that is really skinny. Now, maybe I'm the only one that has this idea, but when I was at a point where I was slimmer because I had lost weight and was underweight, especially after I realized that what I was doing wasn't as healthy as I thought it was, hearing songs on the radio like Anaconda and All About That Bass, is that even what that's called? I don't even know, reading things where people are just shaming anyone that doesn't have maybe the normal amount of fat on their body, or like a big butt or big boobs or whatever it is, didn't make me feel any better about myself. It actually made me feel so much worse and so confused about how I felt about the changes that I made to my body. And I just really wanted to put that out there before I even end this video, because I don't know, it really just bothered me that we can't just get to a point in society where everyone is happy with their body, or at least everyone is acceptant of the other people's bodies around them and not making it a way bigger deal than it needs to be. So yeah, I guess that's all I wanted to talk about. So I really hope that I brought attention to something that I wanted to bring attention to, and that you know a bit more about what I've been through and about what an eating disorder is, more importantly. And yeah, I'm losing my voice because I'm really sick. But yeah, bye.